The timeline of human progress is not a straight line. Across the ancient world, brilliant minds created technologies so advanced they would not be seen again for thousands of years. This journey uncovers 15 of those lost inventions, and by the end, you will see human history through an entirely new lens. How did a complex astronomical computer sink into obscurity for 2 millennia? What secret made Roman concrete stronger than our own? We will examine the evidence and the profound questions these artifacts raise. What does it mean when a civilization's greatest knowledge simply vanishes from the earth? This vibrant era of discovery was no accident. It flourished within a surprisingly connected ancient world, where ideas traveled as far as spices and silk. From the bustling ports of the Mediterranean to the vast caravan routes of the Silk Road, civilizations were in constant dialogue. A Greek astronomer's theory could find its way to a scholar in India, while innovations in Chinese metallurgy might inspire craftsmen in Persia. This was a time of extraordinary cross-pollination, where great libraries like the legendary one in Alexandria aimed to gather all the world's knowledge under one roof. These were not just repositories of scrolls, but vibrant centers of debate and experimentation, where thinkers from different cultures worked side by side. It was within this fertile, interconnected soil that our most astonishing ancient inventions took root. Their eventual loss, then, becomes a more complex mystery than a single disaster. While some technologies vanished in sudden events, many others faded slowly from human memory. Political empires crumbled, trade routes shifted, and cultural priorities turned inward. The delicate chain of knowledge transmission, from master to apprentice, from one fragile manuscript to the next, could be broken by something as simple as a change in ruling philosophy or the gradual decline of a scholarly institution. Understanding this backdrop is crucial. It means these inventions were not magical flukes, but the brilliant output of a globally curious human spirit. Their disappearance is a poignant reminder of how fragile our collective memory can be, which makes the modern rediscovery of each one feel like finding a piece of our own misplaced heritage. But knowledge once woven into the fabric of a society does not unravel all at once. Its disappearance follows distinct, often heartbreaking patterns. Think of a master craftsperson who takes their most guarded techniques to their final resting place, or a library of fragile scrolls consumed by flame. These are the clear-cut tragedies, yet more often loss is a slow fade, a quiet surrender to changing times. A revolutionary device might become a victim of its own success, rendered obsolete by a simpler, cheaper alternative that spreads like wildfire, leaving the original genius forgotten in the rush toward convenience. Or consider the weight of ideology. When a new ruler or belief system rises to power, entire fields of study can be declared forbidden. Workshops are shuttered, texts are gathered and burned, and the very memory of that knowledge is scrubbed from public record, not by accident but by deliberate decree. This is suppression, a conscious choice to unmake an idea. Then there is the subtler, more insidious form of forgetting. It is the black box problem. A brilliant artisan builds a machine that works perfectly, a marvel that defies the understanding of their peers. They operate it through a blend of intuition, secret methods, and hands-on skill passed only to a chosen apprentice. But if that chain of transmission breaks before the underlying science is grasped, the device becomes a magical relic. Future generations can admire it, even use its remnants, but they cannot rebuild its heart. The how is lost, leaving only the baffling what. Of course, the relentless grind of time and conflict plays its part. Earthquakes bury cities, wars scatter populations and destroy centers of learning, and the very materials that hold knowledge, papyrus, parchment, certain metal alloys, succumb to rust, rot, and decay. Recognizing these pathways is crucial. It transforms each story of rediscovery from a simple lucky find into a meaningful victory. It is a recovery mission against the silent forces of entropy, against the tide of time that seeks to smooth all human endeavor back into sand. With that framework in mind, the stage is set. Our journey into the lost and found of history can truly begin. A corroded bronze lump rested in a museum drawer for decades, labeled merely as an oddity from an ancient shipwreck. The divers who found it off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901 were searching for sponges, not history. They stumbled upon a Roman-era vessel laden with statues and treasures, and among the artifacts hauled from the seafloor was this unassuming, crusted object about the size of a large book. To early researchers, it was just a piece of corroded clockwork, perhaps a medieval instrument that had somehow fallen into the older wreck. It was set aside, a mystery waiting for the right eyes to see it. The true nature of this artifact would remain hidden for nearly half a century, until the development of new technologies caught up to its ancient genius. When scientists finally used X-rays and later advanced three-dimensional imaging to peer inside the corrosion, they were stunned. They did not find a simple device. They found a miniature cosmos engineered in bronze, gears upon gears, precisely cut from hand-worked metal, interlocked in a complex dance. There were at least 30 distinct gear wheels, some with teeth so fine they seemed impossible for the era. The mechanism used a system called differential gearing, a technical solution that allows two different rotation speeds to be combined into a single output. This principle is essential in modern car axles, and it was not thought to have been invented until the 1400s. Yet here it was, functioning inside a 2,000-year-old Greek device. This was not a toy or a decorative piece. It was a serious scientific instrument, an analog computer designed to calculate the movements of the heavens. By turning a hand crank on the side, an operator could advance the machine day by day, year by year, and watch as tiny pointers on multiple dials tracked the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets across the zodiac. It could predict lunar phases, and most astonishingly, it could forecast solar and lunar eclipses, likely with a small dial that indicated the timing of these celestial events years in advance. But the Antikythera mechanism did more than just chart the sky. One of its dials was dedicated to the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, including the Olympic Games. This connection is profound. It tells us the device was not built in isolation for a single philosopher king. It linked the cosmic order directly to the cultural and social heartbeat of the Greek world. The heavens govern the timing of sacred athletic contests, and this machine made that relationship tangible. It embodied a specific, advanced worldview, one that saw the universe as a comprehensible, mechanical system, a great clockwork set in motion by divine principles. The existence of such a sophisticated object implies an entire lost tradition. It could not have been the first of its kind, nor the work of a lone tinkerer in a shed. It points to a school of thought, a lineage of engineer astronomers who for generations must have been designing, building, and refining such mechanisms. Their workshops, their manuals, their theoretical writings, all of it vanished. The single surviving device is a ghost, a whisper of a technological capability that the historical record had completely forgotten. Its silent gears ask us a haunting question. If they could build this, what else did they know how to do? The silent, intricate gears of the Antikythera mechanism represent one kind of genius, a pursuit of celestial order. But another form of ancient brilliance was designed for a very different purpose, to bring pure, unstoppable chaos to the battlefield. For the Byzantine Empire, the heir to Rome's Eastern legacy, survival often depended on a single, terrifying technological edge. Imagine the scene from the walls of Constantinople in the 7th century. A formidable Arab fleet, confident and vast, moves to blockade the city, its wooden ships crowding the waters of the Golden Horn. For the defenders, hope seems to drain away with the tide. Then, from the Byzantine Droman warships, a sight that defied all understanding. A stream of liquid fire, roaring from bronze tubes mounted on the prows, arches across the water's surface. Where it strikes, it does not sputter out. It clings and spreads, burning with a fierce, persistent fury even on the waves. Sailors leaping into the sea find no refuge as the flames follow them, turning the water itself into a sheet of fire. This was not mere fire, this was Greek fire. Its deployment was a spectacle of psychological warfare as much as physical destruction. Historical accounts describe the deafening roar that accompanied its discharge, a sound like thunder, and the thick, black, choking smoke that enveloped enemy vessels. The siphons themselves were complex devices, likely using hand pumps to build pressure and force the volatile mixture through a nozzle, where it was ignited. Some descriptions even suggest a form of early flamethrower, a portable version used by infantry. The effect was absolute terror. For centuries, this weapon was the ultimate guardian of Constantinople, repelling sieges by Arab, Russian, and other forces, and securing the empire's naval dominance. Its power, however, came with an immense price, a price paid not in gold but in secrecy. The formula for Greek fire was the most closely guarded state secret of its age. Knowledge of its manufacture was restricted to a very few, possibly a single family within the imperial court. The components were sourced separately and combined in absolute secrecy under the personal supervision of the emperor. Writing the recipe down was forbidden. This was a policy of intentional obscurity, a deliberate act to protect a strategic advantage so complete it could decide the fate of an empire. And it worked for a time, but this same policy of secrecy ensured the knowledge's ultimate extinction. When Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the secret died with the last of its guardians. What was lost was more than just a list of ingredients. It was an entire chemical engineering discipline, creating a stable, storable premix that could be pressurized and projected without exploding. The ship carrying it required profound practical knowledge. The chemists or alchemists of Byzantium had mastered the precise ratios, the thickening agents, the ignition methods, and the delivery mechanics. All of that institutional expertise vanished. Modern historians and chemists have spent decades trying to reverse engineer the substance. The leading candidates include crude petroleum or naphtha, mixed with resins or sulfur to make it sticky, and possibly quicklime, which ignites on contact with water. Yet no modern reconstruction fully matches the terrifying descriptions from medieval chronicles of a fire that water could not quench. The story of Greek fire is a powerful paradox. It shows how the very instinct to protect a civilization's greatest asset, to secure its survival, can also become the mechanism for erasing that knowledge from the human story. It was a technology born from necessity, shrouded in mystery, and ultimately entombed by the very empire it was created to save. Its ghostly flame illuminates a difficult truth that some inventions are so potent, their legacy is not in their continued use, but in the shadow of awe and mystery they leave behind. From the volatile chemistry of Greek fire, we turn to a quieter, more enduring marvel, one that literally forms the foundation of Western civilization. The Romans were master builders, and their signature material was not stone but concrete. Today, we watch modern concrete structures, from bridges to overpasses, show signs of decay after just 50 years. Yet in the heart of Rome, the Pantheon has stood for nearly 2,000. Its vast, unreinforced concrete dome, still the largest of its kind in the world, defies gravity and time with a silent, monumental confidence. How could an ancient material so thoroughly outperform our own? The answer was a secret buried in the very ashes of the Italian earth, a secret lost for over a millennium. Roman concrete was not a single recipe, but a sophisticated system of material science. While they used a lime mortar like many cultures, their revolutionary ingredient was a specific type of volcanic ash known as pozzolana, named for the town of Pozzuoli near Mount Vesuvius. This ash, when mixed with lime and seawater, triggered a chemical reaction modern scientists have only recently begun to fully decode. The process created exceptionally stable compounds, but the real magic happened over centuries. In marine concrete, used to build harbors like the one at Caesarea that still survives underwater, the salt water percolating through the material actually continued the chemical process. It formed rare, plate-like minerals that interlocked, reinforcing the concrete from within and sealing cracks before they could spread. In essence, Roman concrete was not a static material. It was a living one designed to heal itself and grow stronger with age, an ancient precursor to the self-healing concretes we are only now beginning to develop in labs. This was no accident. It represented a deep, empirical understanding of local materials and chemical processes, knowledge gained through generations of observation and experimentation. The loss of this formula was not a single event, but a gradual fading. With the fragmentation of the Roman Empire, the vast, organized supply chains that delivered pozzolana across the Mediterranean broke down. The centralized knowledge of architects and engineers scattered. Simpler, local recipes took over, and the intricate, long-term chemistry of the Roman mix faded from memory. Construction technology did not just stall, it arguably went backward for centuries, as builders struggled to replicate the scale and durability of Roman works with inferior materials. The modern rediscovery of this process is more than a historical footnote, it is a beacon for our future. Our contemporary Portland cement concrete is a major contributor to global carbon emissions due to its production process. Understanding the Roman formula, which used less energy and created a far more durable product, opens a path to greener, more resilient infrastructure. It is a profound link across time, where ancient wisdom, recovered from the silent testimony of crumbling harbors and timeless domes, may literally help us build a more sustainable world. The lesson here is not just about a better building material, it is about a different philosophy of creation, one that worked in harmony with natural processes to create legacies meant to endure. While Roman concrete built monuments to endure, another ancient material was crafted for a far more dynamic and lethal purpose. It was a metal that seemed to hold a storm within its grain. The swords forged in the workshops of Damascus were not merely weapons, they were legends given physical form. Travelers and crusaders brought back tales of blades so sharp they could cleave a feather in mid-air, so resilient they could bend nearly double and spring back true, and so beautifully patterned they looked like flowing water or rippling silk frozen in steel. These were the fabled swords of Damascus, and their secret was not born in Syria, but began as a strange, lumpy ingot from faraway India. This raw material was known as Wootz steel, a high-carbon iron produced in small crucibles. The true artistry, however, lay in the transformative fire of the Damascene smith. Through a process lost to us, the smith would take this ingot and repeatedly heat, fold, and forge it, not just to remove impurities, but to carefully manipulate the very structure of the metal at a microscopic level. The result was that iconic, swirling surface pattern, which was not an etching but a map of the steel's internal soul. For centuries, the method was a closely guarded craft, passed from master to apprentice in a chain of practical, hands-on knowledge. There were no formal manuals, no chemical formulas written down. The recipe lived in the smith's senses, the color of the glow in the forge, the sound of the hammer, the feel of the metal as it was worked. This intimate, empirical understanding was the shield that protected the craft's value, and it became the very reason for its demise. When political upheavals disrupted trade routes and social structures, that fragile chain of apprenticeship was shattered. The last masters took their uncodified wisdom with them, and the forge fires for true Damascus steel went cold sometime after the 17th century. For a long time, the blades were considered a myth, their properties exaggerated by time. Then, in the late 20th century, scientists placed a sliver of an authentic blade under an electron microscope. What they saw was astonishing. The steel contained carbon nanotubes, incredibly strong microscopic structures we associate with cutting-edge modern nanotechnology. These tubes were formed naturally during the intricate forging and cooling process, aligning within the metal to give it both exceptional strength and a unique ability to hold a devastating edge. The discovery was humbling. It proved the ancient smiths were not just skilled artisans, they were unwitting nanotechnologists manipulating matter at an invisible scale through a perfected, generations-old ritual of heat and hammer. Modern metallurgists can now replicate the appearance and even some properties, but a consensus remains that the exact alchemy of the original process, the perfect symphony of ore impurities, folding technique, and thermal cycling, eludes us. The quest to reclaim it is about more than forging a superior sword. It is a symbolic journey to recover a lost dialogue between human intuition and the hidden architecture of the material world. It represents a pinnacle of craftsmanship where the maker's hand understood things their mind could not yet formally explain, a silent conversation with metal that we are still trying to overhear. The Damascus blade was a conversation between a hammer and the soul of steel, a secret held in the very grain of the metal. But what if the hidden genius of an ancient object was not in its strength but in its light? In a quiet corner of the British Museum rests a small, fragile artifact that holds a universe of mystery within its delicate walls. It is the Lycurgus Cup, a stunning Roman cage cup from the 4th century, carved from a single block of glass. At first glance, under ordinary light, it is a deep, opaque jade green, the color of sea glass, but lift it to a window, let light pass through it from behind, and the cup undergoes a magical transformation. The green vanishes, replaced by a glowing, translucent ruby red, as if the vessel itself is filled with wine made of captured sunlight. For over 1,600 years, this dichroic trick was a beautiful enigma, a party trick from antiquity with no explanation. How could a single object possess two completely different colors depending on the direction of the light? The answer, when it finally came, revealed a level of sophistication that seemed to belong to another age entirely. Modern scientists, using powerful electron microscopes, discovered the secret. The Roman glassmakers had, whether by profound design or incredible accident, infused the glass with infinitesimal particles of gold and silver. We are not talking about flakes or dust, but particles so small they are measured in nanometers, mere billionths of a meter. At this scale, metals behave in strange and wonderful ways. The gold and silver nanoparticles act as filters, scattering green light when it shines on them and allowing red light to pass through when illuminated from behind. This is not a simple pigment. It is a precise manipulation of light at the quantum level, a technology we now use in everything from stained glass to medical sensors and spacecraft sunshields. The Romans had achieved nanotechnology. The most plausible explanation is that this was a glorious accident of ancient alchemy. The process likely involved what we now call colloidal dispersion. Imagine a Roman workshop. A glassmaker, perhaps trying to create a special color, adds a tiny amount of a powdered metal ore or even a fleck of a gold leaf to his molten glass batch. Through the specific conditions of heating and cooling, the metal does not simply dissolve or clump. Instead, it breaks down into those billions of nanoparticles, suspended evenly throughout the material like stars in a microscopic galaxy. The crafter would have seen the stunning result, but they almost certainly did not understand the physics behind it. The knowledge was empirical, locked in a recipe that said, add this pinch of that dust, heat for this long, and you get magic. This intuitive, hands-on chemistry was the peak of their material science, and like so much hands-on knowledge, it was terrifyingly fragile. The exact formula, the specific ore, the precise thermal cycle, all of it was lost, perhaps with the closing of a single workshop or the passing of a master artisan who never wrote his methods down. The Lycurgus Cup, therefore, is more than a beautiful relic. It is a tiny, silent witness to a road not taken. It proves that the ancient world could stumble upon scientific principles far beyond its theoretical framework. They could manipulate matter at an invisible scale through ritual and observation, achieving effects that would not be understood, let alone replicated, until the modern era of quantum physics. It stands as a humbling reminder that discovery is not always a straight line from theory to practice. Sometimes it is a beautiful, inexplicable accident that glows for a moment in history, only to fade back into the darkness for centuries, waiting for a future generation to finally understand what they were truly looking at. The shimmering quantum magic of the Lycurgus Cup was a secret held within glass itself, a beautiful accident of light. But what if another ancient object contained a secret of power, a deliberate harnessing of an invisible force? In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq sits a humble, unassuming clay jar about the size of a man's fist. It was unearthed in 1936 near Baghdad, and it looks like countless other storage vessels from the ancient world. But this pot is different. Inside, archaeologists found a rolled copper sheet forming a cylinder, and within that, an iron rod. The top was sealed with asphalt or bitumen, which held the rod perfectly in place, insulating it from the copper. To any modern eye, the assembly is eerily familiar. It looks for all the world like a primitive battery, dating from the Parthian or Sasanian period, roughly 2,000 years ago. This object, known as the Baghdad Battery, has become one of archaeology's most electrifying puzzles. The principle is simple yet profound. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid vinegar, fermented grape juice, or even lemon juice, a chemical reaction would occur. The acidic electrolyte would allow electrons to flow from the iron rod to the copper cylinder through the liquid, creating a small electrical potential. Connecting the two metals with a wire would produce a continuous, though very weak, electric current. It would not have been enough to light a room, but it would have been enough to feel a faint but distinct tingle on the tongue, or to produce a visible spark under the right conditions. So what was it for? The debate among historians is fierce and unresolved. One compelling theory points to electroplating. The process of using electricity to deposit a thin layer of one metal, like gold or silver, onto the surface of another was known in Mesopotamia. Artifacts exist that show gilding so fine it defies explanation by simple mercury amalgam techniques. A series of these jars, connected together to increase the voltage, could have provided just enough current to plate a small object, like a religious statue or a piece of jewelry, with a dazzling, otherworldly sheen. Other scholars suggest a medical application. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe using the shock from electric fish, like the torpedo ray, to numb pain or treat ailments like gout. Could a priest or healer have used a more controllable, man-made version of this shocking therapy? Or perhaps the purpose was purely ritualistic. In a temple, the mysterious ability to generate a spark from a pot of vinegar could have been a powerful demonstration of divine favor, a sacred trick to inspire awe among worshippers. The truth is, we may never know its intended use with certainty, and that ambiguity is precisely what makes the Baghdad Battery so profoundly important. Its existence, whether it was a tool, a toy, or a temple object, suggests that ancient experimenters were not just observing nature. they were actively tinkering with its fundamental forces. They had stumbled upon the core principle of the electrochemical cell, the basic building block of every battery that powers our modern world. This was not a theoretical concept written on a scroll. It was a working physical model, a proof of concept crafted from clay, copper, and iron. Then the spark went out. The knowledge, whether it was confined to a single workshop or a secretive priestly guild, did not spread. It did not ignite a chain of experimentation that could have led to a deeper understanding of electromagnetism. The concept of controlled electricity faded from human endeavor, buried in the sands along with the jar itself. It would take another 1800 years for Alessandro Volta, in the year 1800, to stack discs of silver and zinc with brine-soaked cardboard and officially invent the voltaic pile, restarting the electrical age from zero. The Baghdad battery therefore stands as history's most poignant what-if. It is a quiet testament to a path not taken, a flicker of potential in a distant past that glowed for a moment and then went dark, leaving us to wonder just how different the story of technology might have been if that tiny current had found a way to keep flowing. The silent spark of the Baghdad battery represents a physical puzzle, a device whose function we can at least theorize. But what happens when the invention itself is not a machine, but an entire language of thought, written down yet utterly silent? In the vault of Yale University's Voynich Library rests perhaps the world's most famous book that no one can read. The Voynich Manuscript is a small, dense volume of about 240 vellum pages, filled from edge to edge with a flowing, unknown script and accompanied by lavish, bewildering illustrations. Carbon dating places its creation in the early 15th century, somewhere in Europe, but from that point all certainty ends. The text, composed in a unique alphabet of elegant, looping characters, has resisted over a century of intense cryptanalysis by the world's top codebreakers, including teams from both world wars. It is not a known language written in a simple cipher. It behaves unlike any human language on record, with statistical patterns that are both oddly structured and deeply strange. This is not merely a lost shopping list or a personal diary. The content, as suggested by the imagery, appears to be a deliberate encyclopedia of a world we do not recognize. Its pages are divided into distinct sections. There is a herbal section with paintings of plants that are lush, detailed, and completely unidentifiable. Their roots, leaves, and flowers resemble nothing in any known botanical manual from the era. Some theorists look at the precise, bulbous structures and wonder if they could be stylized representations of cellular structures, seen through a lens of imagination or perhaps even through some lost magnifying technology. Another section is filled with astrological and astronomical diagrams, showing circular charts with unfamiliar constellations and celestial bodies arranged in impossible orbits. Then there are the most enigmatic pages of all, the so-called biological and balneological sections. These depict small, nude female figures, often immersed in or connected by elaborate networks of tubes and vessels that resemble an intricate, organic plumbing system, flowing with a green, liquid substance. It looks less like a medieval manuscript and more like a schematic for a process, a bizarre fusion of anatomy, hydraulics, and alchemy. This is where the idea of lost technology enters the speculation. Could these intricate diagrams represent a forgotten technological or alchemical process, perhaps a method for distillation, or a symbolic representation of human physiology and health that was far more advanced than standard Galenic medicine? The piping systems are too deliberate, too central to the imagery to be mere decoration. They suggest a mind preoccupied with flow, connection, and transformation. Of course, the other dominant theory is that the entire volume is an elaborate, purposeless hoax, a nonsense book crafted to deceive a wealthy patron. Yet the consistency and complexity of the script, the clear organization into thematic sections, and the sheer cost of the materials and labor argue against a mere forgery for profit. It feels like a work of sincere, if utterly alien, scholarship. This is the core of its haunting power. The Voynich manuscript may not be a lost device, but it is potentially a lost framework. It could be the sole surviving record of a unique, localized natural philosophy, a school of thought that blended observation, symbolism, and theory in a way that made perfect sense to its creator and their circle, but whose key, the spoken language, the cultural context, the symbolic dictionary, has vanished without a trace. Its pages scream with intentionality, yet they speak in a whisper we cannot decipher. It embodies a different kind of loss, not the smashing of a machine, but the fading of a worldview. The knowledge is not physically gone, it is right there in vibrant color on parchment. But without the codex of understanding needed to interpret it, the book might as well be a stone. It stands as the ultimate metaphor for the fragility of human knowledge. We can preserve the artifact perfectly, but if we lose the shared meaning that gives it life, we are left holding a beautiful, frustrating ghost. While the Voynich manuscript remains a silent book of secrets, another ancient inventor sought not to conceal knowledge, but to broadcast a warning from the earth itself. In the year 132, in the Grand Han Dynasty court of China, the scholar Zhang Heng presented a creation that seemed to border on magic. It was a large, ornate bronze urn standing perhaps 6 feet tall. Around its middle, 8 dragons faced outward in the cardinal directions, each holding a bronze ball in its jaws. Below them, 8 corresponding bronze frogs sat with their mouths open, waiting. According to the court histories, this device did something extraordinary. When an earthquake struck, even hundreds of miles away, one of the dragons would release its ball. The ball would clatter into the mouth of the frog below, producing a loud sound to alert observers. More importantly, the specific dragon that activated would point unerringly in the direction of the quake's epicenter. To a court skeptical of what they could not see, Zhang Heng's machine soon proved its worth. The records tell of a day when the dragon facing west released its ball, though no tremor was felt in the capital. Days later, a messenger arrived from a western province reporting a major earthquake. The device had detected what human senses could not, earning it the name Hufeng Didongyi, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth. The genius of this seismoscope was not in its ornate dragons, but in the mystery hidden inside the bronze urn. Zhang Heng left no detailed plans, so its internal mechanism is a historical puzzle. Modern engineers and historians, however, have proposed a beautifully elegant solution. The most accepted theory suggests a simple, suspended pendulum hung from the top of the vessel. Around the base of this pendulum, 8 carefully balanced levers were arranged, each connected to a dragon's head on the outside. When seismic waves from a distant quake reached the device, they would cause the heavy pendulum to swing. But it would not swing wildly. The specific direction of the incoming waves would nudge the pendulum toward just one of the 8 levers, tipping it and triggering the release of that single dragon's ball. This is a principle of inertia, a sophisticated understanding that a suspended mass remains relatively still while the world moves around it. It means Zhang Heng had conceptually invented an inertial seismometer nearly 2,000 years before the modern version was developed in Europe. His device was not measuring magnitude, but it was performing a crucial first step in seismology, triangulating the source of a disturbance. This was not magic. It was applied physics of the highest order, transforming an invisible, terrifying force of nature into a clear, mechanical signal. The loss of this technology's principle to the Western world is a stark lesson in how knowledge can be isolated by geography and culture. For centuries in China, later versions of the seismoscope were built and used, becoming part of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau's toolkit. But this practical, mechanical approach to understanding the Earth did not travel the Silk Road westward. When it was eventually forgotten even in China after the dynasty's fall, the very concept of a mechanical earthquake detector vanished from human engineering. European scientists would spend the next millennium and a half viewing earthquakes purely as metaphysical events or acts of divine will. The foundational idea that ground motion could be systematically measured and analyzed had to be completely rediscovered in the 1800s, starting from scratch. This separate invention, parallel loss, and independent reinvention highlights a profound truth about human progress. Innovation is not a single, global river flowing forward. It is more like a series of isolated springs bubbling up in different valleys. Sometimes these springs feed into each other, creating a mighty current. But just as often, they dry up in their own basin, leaving no trace for the wider world. Zhang Heng's dragon urn is a monument to one of those brilliant, isolated springs, a testament to a path of inquiry that glowed brightly, faded, and had to be painstakingly relit centuries later and continents away. The story of Zhang Heng's dragon urn reminds us that knowledge can fade in isolation, but sometimes it is not distance but deliberate power that snuffs out a spark of innovation. Roman historian Pliny the Elder preserved a curious anecdote about the reign of Emperor Tiberius. An unnamed artisan came before the emperor, presenting a gift that seemed to defy nature itself. It was a drinking bowl, but not one made of metal or common glass. When the inventor demonstrated its properties, he did not handle it with care. He deliberately threw it onto the stone floor. Instead of shattering into 1,000 glittering shards, the vessel merely dented like a piece of soft metal. Then, taking a small hammer, the man proceeded to tap the dent out, restoring the bowl to its original, flawless shape. This was flexible glass. Tiberius, the story goes, was initially amazed, but his wonder quickly turned to cold calculation. He asked the inventor if anyone else knew the secret of this material. Upon hearing that the secret was the artisan's alone, the emperor's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the man executed and his workshop razed to the ground, ensuring the knowledge died with its creator. The official reason, as Pliny records it, was economic. Tiberius feared that a substance as beautiful as silver, yet unbreakable, would utterly collapse the value of the empire's gold and silver reserves, destabilizing the entire economy. Whether this event actually happened is debated by historians. It has the feel of a moral fable, a cautionary tale about the dangers of presenting a ruler with something they cannot control. Yet the persistence of the story, recorded by a serious naturalist like Pliny, suggests it may have been rooted in a kernel of truth, perhaps a rumor of a remarkable material that circulated in imperial circles. The idea is not as far-fetched as it might seem. We know the Romans were master glassmakers, as the Lycurgus Cup proves. Experiments with adding different minerals or using novel cooling techniques could have accidentally produced a glass with unusual properties, perhaps a form of early polymer or a silica-based material treated to become malleable. Imagine a substance with the clarity of glass but the resilience of a modern plastic bottle, a material that could revolutionize everything from tableware to windows to lenses. The loss, then, is not necessarily of a specific perfected recipe, but of an entire direction of inquiry. The story of Tiberius and the glassmaker represents a different pathway to loss, one driven not by the slow fade of forgetting, but by the active, chilling hand of suppression. It is the political extinction of an idea because it threatened existing structures of power and wealth, an invention deemed too disruptive, too destabilizing to the social or economic order, could be judged not on its merits but on its perceived danger. This theme echoes through history, where progress is sometimes halted not by a lack of capability, but by a conscious choice from those who benefit from the status quo. The flexible glass, whether real or symbolic, becomes a powerful metaphor for the innovations we never see, the branches of the technological tree that were cut off before they could ever bear fruit. It asks us to consider what other wonders might have been lost not to time or accident, but to a decree from a fearful ruler, a decision that may have cost the world an entire class of materials for over 1,000 years. The suppression of an idea by imperial decree is one way for knowledge to vanish, but a more common and perhaps more haunting disappearance happens when an entire civilization fades, taking its language with it. On the sun-baked island of Crete, within the ruins of the ancient Minoan palace of Phaistos, an archaeologist's trowel struck something extraordinary in 1908. It was not a statue or a weapon, but a simple disk of fired clay, roughly the size of a small plate. At first glance, it might have seemed like a child's toy or a piece of decorative pottery. But a closer look revealed its true mystery. Both sides of the disk were covered, from the outer edge spiraling inward, with a series of tiny, precise symbols. There were 45 distinct pictographs stamped into the soft clay with individual seals before it was baked hard. We see human heads with elaborate hairstyles, birds in flight, fish, flowers, shields, and what looks like a beehive. In total, 241 symbols march in a deliberate, winding sequence, grouped into what appear to be words or phrases separated by short lines. This is the Phaistos disk, and it is utterly alone. Dating to the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, it is a message from the height of Minoan culture. And it is a message no one alive today can read. The mystery deepens because this script appears nowhere else. Not on the walls of the grand palace it was found in, not on any other clay tablet in Crete, not on a single piece of pottery or fragment of jewelry from the era. It is a one-of-a-kind object. This singularity is what makes it so profoundly puzzling and significant. If it were a common form of writing, we could compare multiple texts, look for repeating patterns, and slowly crack the code, as scholars did with Egyptian hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone. But with only one example, decipherment becomes almost mathematically impossible. We have no starting point, no bilingual text, no way to even guess if the symbols represent sounds, whole words, or abstract concepts. So what was it? The theories are as varied as the symbols themselves. Some scholars argue it is an administrative document, perhaps a royal inventory or a tax record from the palace, created with a kind of bureaucratic stamping technology for efficiency. Others see a religious hymn or a magical incantation, a sacred text meant to be used in a ceremony, its power sealed in clay. There is even a playful suggestion that it is an ancient board game, a spiral path of symbols where players move tokens based on the images. But the most compelling interpretation is that the disk represents a complete, self-contained information technology that died with its creators. Think of it not as a failed attempt at writing, but as a successful, highly specialized system. It might have been used by a specific guild, a temple, or a royal office for a very particular purpose. The stamped symbols could have been a form of early movable type, a way to quickly produce standardized documents long before Gutenberg. This was not a technology meant to record poetry or history. It was a tool for a specific job, and when that job or the people who did it vanished, the tool became meaningless. The Minoan civilization, brilliant and sophisticated, was eventually overtaken by Mycenaean Greeks and then collapsed into the shadows of myth. Their primary script, called Linear A, also remains largely undeciphered. The Phaistos disk could be a parallel system, a different dialect of thought pressed into clay. Its loss, therefore, is not just the loss of a single object's meaning. It is the loss of an entire cognitive world. Each of those 45 symbols was a unit of thought, a building block of logic and communication that made perfect sense to someone. Together, they formed statements, records, or stories that were clearly important enough to preserve permanently. That shared understanding, that entire framework for organizing information, is gone. The disc is a physical metaphor for the silence that follows cultural extinction. It is a locked door to a room we know existed, but for which we have thrown away the key. It reminds us that writing is not just marks on a surface. It is a contract of meaning between people across time. When the last person who understands that contract passes, the writing does not become mysterious, it becomes inert. It becomes a beautiful, frustrating artifact that speaks only of its own silence, a stark lesson in how entire languages and the worlds they described can slip beneath the waves of history, leaving behind only a single, spiraling whisper on a clay disk. Deep within the crypts of the Hathor Temple at Dendera, a stone carving has ignited a modern firestorm of speculation. The relief shows a strange, elongated object, like a giant pear-shaped bulb. Inside it, a wavy line stretches from one end to the other, and from its base, a cord seems to trail away, connecting to a box held by a kneeling figure. To a modern eye, conditioned by a world of electricity, the interpretation feels almost instinctive. It looks for all the world like a depiction of an ancient light bulb, complete with its filament, socket, and power supply. This interpretation, championed by some alternative historians, suggests the Egyptians might have possessed a form of advanced electrical illumination, a technology lost to the sands and later mythologized in stone. The implications are tantalizing. How else, they ask, could the artists and builders of tombs deep within pyramids, where no soot from torches has ever been found, have seen to execute their perfect work? The Dendera light, as it is often called, becomes a key piece in a puzzle arguing for a forgotten chapter of high technology. Mainstream Egyptology, however, hears a very different story when it looks at the same carving. Scholars point to the full context of the temple's artwork and the accompanying hieroglyphic texts. In this view, the scene is not an electrical diagram, but a profound mythological symbol. The bulb is interpreted as a lotus flower, a sacred plant in Egyptian belief that emerges from the primordial waters at the moment of creation. The wavy line inside is not a filament, but a snake, born from the lotus, representing the divine life force and the rising sun. The cable is a serpent's tail, and the power box is actually a jed pillar, a symbol of stability held by the god He. The entire tableau is a cosmological statement, illustrating the moment the world springs into being from the dark waters of chaos, illuminated not by artificial light, but by the first dawn of creation itself. This is the established, academically supported interpretation. The controversy itself, the passionate debate between these two wildly different readings, is perhaps more instructive than any single answer could be. It serves as a perfect case study in how we, as modern people, view the ancient past. We are children of the technological age. Our world is built on circuits and currents, so when we see an unfamiliar ancient image, our brains naturally reach for the closest modern equivalent. This is a form of cognitive projection. We see what we are primed to see, and in doing so, we risk overwriting the ancient mind's own symbolic language with our own dictionary of invention. The Dendera relief debate forces a crucial question upon us. Where is the line between recognizing genuine, lost ingenuity and imposing our own technological fantasies onto the past? It challenges us to practice a kind of intellectual humility. To truly understand an ancient artifact, we must first try to see it through the eyes of its creators, within the framework of their beliefs, their art, and their written explanations. This does not diminish their brilliance. Understanding the Dendera carving as a creation myth does not make it less sophisticated. On the contrary, it reveals a different kind of profound intelligence, one that used stone and symbol to encode complex philosophical and theological concepts about the origin of light, life, and cosmic order. The yearning to see a light bulb at Dendera speaks to a deeper human desire, a wish to find a direct technological lineage, to see our ancestors as holding literal versions of our tools. But perhaps the greater connection is more abstract. Whether it represents a mystical snake born from a lotus or a literal lamp, the central theme of both interpretations is the same: the eternal human struggle to conquer darkness, to create and sustain illumination, whether by spiritual metaphor or by physical filament. The stone at Dendera, therefore, holds a double lesson. It cautions us against easy, anachronistic answers, while simultaneously reminding us that the drive to bring light into the dark is one of humanity's oldest and most persistent stories, told in the language of both myth and machine. The debate over ancient light reminds us that symbols can be easily misread, but some artifacts carry a meaning so physical, so undeniably deliberate, that their silence is even more profound. Deep in the steamy lowlands of Costa Rica's Diquis Delta, workers clearing land for banana plantations in the 1930s uncovered something that stopped them cold. Emerging from the rich soil were massive, impossibly round stones. They were not boulders weathered by time, but objects of clear human intention, polished to a smooth, almost unnatural perfection. These are the stone spheres of Costa Rica, and today over 300 of them have been found, ranging from the size of a grapefruit to colossal orbs over 2 meters across, weighing more than 15 tons. They were crafted by the indigenous cultures of the region, beginning around 300 years into the Common Era and continuing for over a millennium. Their creation is a staggering feat of patience and skill. The spheres were made from hard, igneous rock like granite or gabbro, materials that defy simple carving. Archaeologists believe the process likely began by selecting a large boulder, then using fire to heat the surface. Once hot, the stone was rapidly cooled, perhaps with water, causing the outer layer to crack and flake away. Then, with other, harder stones, craftsmen would have painstakingly pecked and ground the surface, slowly working the rough shape toward a sphere. The final step involved polishing with sand or finer abrasives, perhaps over generations, to achieve that breathtaking, seamless curve. The true mystery, however, is not entirely how they did it, though the labor involved is almost unimaginable. The deeper puzzle is why. What drove these communities to invest such immense effort into creating objects of pure geometry? The spheres were often found arranged in groups, sometimes in lines, triangles, or parabolic curves. This has led to theories that they served as astronomical markers, aligning with celestial events like solstices or the rising of certain stars, turning the landscape into a giant, open-air observatory. Others see them as symbols of power and status, placed near the homes of chiefs to denote authority, or as territorial markers for different clans. Some spheres were found in burial sites, suggesting a sacred, ceremonial role connected to the cycles of life and the cosmos. The most compelling answer is that they were likely all these things at once. Their meaning was not fixed to a single purpose, but woven into the social, spiritual, and political fabric of the society that made them. This is knowledge that was not written down in any codex. It was written in the land itself, in the placement of one sphere relative to another, in stories and songs that explained their significance. And that is precisely what was lost. With the arrival of Spanish colonization in the 16th century, the indigenous societies were violently disrupted. Populations were decimated by conflict and disease, social structures collapsed, and the people were displaced from their ancestral lands. The living tradition that gave the spheres their meaning, the oral history that passed the techniques and the reasons for their creation from elder to apprentice, was severed. The stones remained, but the world that understood them was gone. They became mute monuments. The spheres stand as a powerful testament to a different kind of technological achievement, one that is not about mechanics or chemistry, but about aesthetics, cosmology, and communal effort. They demonstrate that advanced craftsmanship, a profound understanding of geometry and stoneworking, can exist entirely outside the framework of written language. This knowledge was held in the hands, the eyes, and the collective memory of a culture, and because it was not inscribed on parchment or clay, but carried in people and practiced in place, it was terrifyingly vulnerable. When that culture was fragmented, the knowledge evaporated, leaving behind only the perfect, silent stones as a question mark in the jungle. Their legacy is a poignant reminder that technology is not just what we build, but why we build it, and that the most sophisticated systems of meaning can be the most fragile of all. The silent, perfect geometry of the Costa Rican spheres speaks of a knowledge held in the land itself. But what if the key to another lost invention was not in the earth, but held up to the sky in the palm of a navigator's hand? Norse sagas tell of Viking sailors using a mysterious sunstone to guide their longships across the treacherous North Atlantic, on days when the sun was hidden behind thick cloud, or during the endless twilight of northern summers. This stone was said to reveal the sun's hidden position. For centuries, this was dismissed as poetic myth, another magical element in the tales of seafaring heroes. The truth, when it was finally uncovered, revealed a breathtaking application of physics that the Vikings themselves likely never formally understood. The key candidate is a transparent crystal known as Iceland spar, a form of calcite. When you hold a piece of this crystal, something remarkable happens. It exhibits a property called birefringence, meaning it splits a beam of light into two separate rays. To a Viking navigator, this would have presented a practical tool. The technique is elegant in its simplicity. On an overcast day when the sky is a uniform, featureless gray, the sun's light still reaches the earth. That light is polarized, meaning its waves vibrate in a specific direction relative to the hidden sun. By looking up through the clear calcite crystal and slowly rotating it, the navigator would watch for a change. At a certain orientation, the crystal would appear to darken or lighten uniformly because the polarized light from the sun's direction was being blocked or enhanced. By finding this null point, the sailor could literally trace an invisible line across the sky, pinpointing the sun's location even when their eyes saw nothing but cloud. This was not magic, it was a brilliant, empirical use of optical mineralogy. It gave Viking explorers a crucial, consistent edge, allowing them to venture farther into the open ocean than any other European culture of their time, eventually reaching the shores of North America. They were not just brave sailors, they were masterful environmental technicians, using the subtle properties of light itself as a compass. So why did this incredible technology fade into legend? The answer lies in the march of simpler, more accessible tools. With the spread of the magnetic compass from Asia into Europe, navigation underwent a democratization. The compass was cheaper, easier to produce, and required no special skill to interpret beyond reading a dial. It worked in any weather, day or night, as long as you had the instrument. The Sunstone, by contrast, relied on a specific, high-quality mineral, a clear understanding of the technique, and enough ambient light to function. It was a specialist tool in a world moving toward standardization. As magnetic compasses became standard equipment on ships, the intricate knowledge of how to read the sky with a crystal was no longer passed down. The Sunstone became a story, a curious footnote in the sagas, its physical principle completely forgotten by the wider world. It was not until the 20th century, when scientists studying the polarization of light looked back at the old texts with new understanding, that the legend was resurrected as plausible science. The Viking Sunstone, therefore, represents a fascinating category of loss, the forgotten environmental technology. It is a tool that did not seek to conquer nature, but to listen to it more closely, to decode a hidden signal in the very atmosphere. Its disappearance marks a shift from intuitive, observation-based mastery to a reliance on manufactured instruments. We gained consistency and ease, but we lost a deeply intimate dialogue with the natural world, a way of navigating that required the human eye, a crystal, and a profound patience to see what was invisible to everyone else. The Sunstone allowed a navigator to decode hidden light, but another civilization built an entire empire on a language of knots. High in the Andes, the Inca governed the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas, a realm of staggering complexity stretching thousands of miles without ever putting pen to paper or chisel to stone in a traditional sense. Their bureaucracy, their laws, and possibly their very literature were recorded in a medium that feels alien to us, a system of knotted cords called the Quipu. At first glance, a Quipu looks deceptively simple, a main cord from which dozens, sometimes hundreds, of pendant strings dangle like a fringe, but each element was a deliberate choice. The type of fiber, whether it was cotton or camelid wool, held meaning. The color of each cord was a category. The specific placement of a knot along the string denoted a number using a base 10 positional system, much like our own. And the type of knot itself, how it was tied, could signify different things. With these variables, the Quipu became an incredibly sophisticated data storage device. Imperial administrators used them to track everything: the inventory of storehouses, census counts, tax obligations, and military organization. A trained Quipukamayok, or knot keeper, could run their fingers along these cords and recite precise information about a distant province they had never seen. This much scholars have largely decoded, but the deeper mystery lies in the belief, supported by early Spanish chronicles and emerging research, that not all Quipus were mere spreadsheets. Some may have been narrative. They might have recorded histories, genealogies, laws, and even poems or songs. This transforms the Quipu from an accounting tool into a potential three-dimensional writing system, a tactile language where information was stored in space, texture, and sequence rather than in symbols on a flat surface. It was a complete alternative information technology, developed in isolation from the alphabetic or logographic systems of Europe and Asia. Its loss is one of history's most profound silences. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they systematically dismantled the Inca state. Recognizing the Quipu as the central nervous system of the empire they sought to control, they targeted the Quipucamayoks. Many knot keepers were lost to the hardships of conquest, and the Spanish authorities, viewing the cords as pagan tools or mere curiosities, actively suppressed their use, demanding records be kept in Spanish on paper. The living chain of instruction was broken within a generation. The physical artifacts survived in museum collections, hundreds of them, but the full code for interpreting the non-numerical stories they held died with the last masters. Today, we are left with the haunting presence of these beautiful, intricate objects. We can count their knots, analyze their colors and structures, but we cannot hear the stories they were meant to tell. A Quipu in a glass case is like a book whose pages we can touch, whose binding we can admire, but written in an alphabet we no longer possess. It represents a catastrophic loss of a worldview, a reminder that human thought can be structured and preserved in forms utterly foreign to our paper-based mindset. The Quipu challenges our very definition of writing and warns us that the most unique and sophisticated systems of knowledge are often the most vulnerable, disappearing not for lack of durability, but for lack of a living voice to speak their meaning. From the knotted cords of the Inca to the celestial gears of ancient Greece, these 15 stories are not isolated curiosities. They are fragments of a single, profound truth. Our journey through human history is not a steady march from darkness into light, but a winding path through a forest of forgotten brilliance. We have stood on peaks of ingenuity, only to lose the map that led us there, tumbling into valleys of amnesia for centuries at a time. The silent gears of the Antikythera Mechanism, the self-healing Roman concrete, the quantum glow of the Lycurgus Cup, each one represents a fork in the road not taken. A delay in understanding, a diversion in progress caused by the fragile nature of knowledge itself. It vanishes in the smoke of a library fire, in the whispered secret of a single family, in the quiet cessation of an apprenticeship, or in the overwhelming tide of cultural change. These losses are not mere footnotes, they are chasms in our timeline. Imagine a world where the principles of the Baghdad battery sparked a continuous thread of electrical inquiry. Consider a civilization that never forgot how to make concrete stronger with each passing century. Ponder the libraries of thought that might have been written in the language of knots. The cumulative effect of these disappearances is staggering. They ask us to reconsider what we mean by progress. Perhaps it is not a linear climb, but a series of rediscoveries, a constant reaching back through the fog to reclaim pieces of our own misplaced intellect. This is where the feeling of awe truly takes root. It is not just wonder at what they built, but a deep humility in recognizing that genius is not the sole property of our modern age. It is a timeless human trait, bubbling up in different times and places, often with no connection to one another. The same spark of curiosity that led a Viking to hold a crystal to a cloudy sky also led a Roman glassmaker to stir gold into molten sand. This recurring brilliance is our shared inheritance, and so these artifacts become more than museum pieces. They are urgent messengers from the past. They challenge us to be better stewards of our own knowledge, to build systems of preservation that are as resilient as the ideas they protect. They urge us to look at the quiet craftspeople, the intuitive engineers, and the oral historians in our own time with renewed respect, for they are the living links in a chain that is so easily broken. Most of all, they invite us to remain open, to look at the familiar landscapes of history with a curious eye, ready for the possibility that the next buried tablet, or the next overlooked manuscript, might hold a secret that once again reshapes our understanding of who we are and what we are capable of achieving. The past, it seems, is still speaking if we are willing to listen. Which of these lost inventions leaves you contemplating the most? Share your thoughts below, and if you are eager for more journeys into the mysteries of our world, we invite you to join us as we continue to explore.